host, or hijacker. No one is safe. Right now, as you watch this, a single-celled parasite is already living inside roughly a third of all the human beings alive, and there is a real chance one of them is you. Not just in your gut, in your tissue, and sometimes the brain itself. It folds into a tiny walled-off cyst and waits, having arrived from a bite of undercooked meat, or a trace of soil on an unwashed vegetable, or the invisible residue of a cat that crossed a garden months ago. In a rat, this same parasite does something that sounds impossible. It reaches into the animal's brain and switches off its oldest fear, the terror of cats, and in some cases turns that terror into attraction, drawing the rat toward the very smell that should mean death. That part is proven. And then there is the harder question, the one scientists are still arguing over, still cautious, still divided. Whether in any small way it does anything at all to us. Its name is Toxoplasma gondii. And this is the episode where the hijacker finally reaches the human being watching. To understand what you might be carrying, start with the size of it. Toxoplasma gondii is a single cell. One cell. It is a protozoan, an apicomplexan from the same ancient branch of life that gave us the malaria parasite, and from that one cell it has built one of the most successful takeovers in the history of life on this planet. It can infect very nearly any warm-blooded animal, rodents, birds, sheep, pigs, and us. It is estimated to live, quietly and permanently, in roughly a third of all the human beings alive. Most of them will never know. Most of them will never feel a thing. That is not a failure of the parasite. That is the parasite working exactly as it was built to. Because for all the bodies it can enter, there is only one it truly wants. Only one place on Earth where Toxoplasma can finish the thing it came to do. A cat. Domestic cats and their wild relatives, the felids, are the only animals in which this parasite can reproduce sexually. Only inside a cat's gut can it complete its life cycle and make the next generation. Everywhere else, in every other creature, it is essentially stranded, biding its time in the tissues, unable to close the circle. This is the whole game. Every strange and terrible thing this parasite does exists to answer one question. How do you get from the body you're trapped in back into a cat? For most of its intermediate hosts, the answer is simple and grim. Get eaten. A cat eats an infected mouse, and the parasite is home. But a mouse does not want to be eaten. A rat, in particular, carries a fear of cats so ancient and so deeply wired that a lab rat, generations removed from any wild predator, will still freeze and flee at the faintest trace of cat odor. It has never seen a cat. It is terrified of one anyway. That fear is the parasite's obstacle. And so, the parasite removes it. In 2 landmark studies, researchers documented something that reads like fiction. Burdoy, Webster and MacDonald in the year 2000 showed that rats infected with Toxoplasma lost their innate aversion to the smell of cats. And in the effect they named fatal attraction, some infected rats did not merely tolerate the odor of cat urine, they were drawn toward it. The signal that should have screamed danger now whispered something closer to interest. A later study by Vyas and colleagues sharpened the horror. The change was surgical. The infected rodents were not sick, not stupid, not generally broken. Their memory worked. Their other fears worked. Their sense of smell worked. Only one thing had been edited out. The fear of the one animal that could carry the parasite home. So how does a single cell reach into a mammal's brain and delete one specific fear? Here I have to be careful with you because this is the edge of what we actually know. In infected rodents, the parasite forms cysts throughout the brain, and researchers have reported that they tend to cluster in and around the amygdala, the very region that processes fear. The parasite also appears to meddle with the brain's chemistry. Remarkably, Toxoplasma carries its own genes for an enzyme in the pathway that builds dopamine, one of the brain's key signaling molecules, and in laboratory studies infected cells have been shown to release more of it. dopamine, testosterone, inflammation, the physical location of the cysts. All of these have been offered as pieces of the answer, but no single clean mechanism has won. A later reassessment even questioned how much the parasite's own dopamine enzyme really drives the behavior at all. So the honest statement is this: we know the parasite changes the rat. We are still, right now, arguing about exactly how. And that has been the safe part of this story. The part that happens to rats in a laboratory at a comfortable distance. Now it comes for you. Because you are a warm-blooded animal, and to Toxoplasma you are just another intermediate host, another body to wait inside. It reaches you through 3 doors. The first is your plate, undercooked or raw meat carrying microscopic cysts in the muscle. The second is the environment, the hardy, egg-like oocysts an infected cat sheds in its feces, which can survive in soil and water for months, on unwashed produce, on the hands that cleaned a litter box. The third is the most intimate of all, from a newly infected mother across the placenta into a child not yet born. Once inside you, if your immune system is healthy, it does what it does best. It goes quiet. It walls itself into cysts, most often in muscle and in brain, and it settles in. Not for weeks. For the rest of your life. And for the overwhelming majority of people, it will sit there and do, as far as we can measure, nothing at all. But you have heard otherwise. You have heard this called a mind control parasite, the bug that hijacks human brains. And you are owed the honest version of that story, both halves of it. Here is the seductive half. A body of research, led for years by the scientist Jaroslav Fleger, has found correlations, statistical links between latent Toxoplasma infection and subtle differences in people, slightly slower reaction times, a little more risk-taking. Some studies reported infected drivers involved in more traffic accidents. Others noted statistical associations with schizophrenia. Taken together, they paint a spooky picture, a parasite quietly nudging human behavior from the shadows of the brain. And here is the half the headlines leave out. Correlation is not control. These are statistical associations tangled with confounding factors, and they do not prove the parasite changed anyone. When researchers ran one of the most rigorous tests to date, following around 1,000 people from birth in the Dunedin study, published in 2016, they found essentially no meaningful link between Toxoplasma infection and psychiatric disorder. Personality, impulse control, or thinking. No meaningful effect they could measure. So this is where the science honestly stands. In rats, the manipulation is real, replicated, adaptive, plain. In humans, it is a contested correlation that the largest careful study could not confirm. Anyone who tells you, flatly, that this parasite is changing how you think is telling you something the evidence does not support. And the most fascinating thing here may not be the parasite at all. It is science in the act of checking its own most seductive story and refusing to be fooled by it. So let me be clear and calm about the real risks, because there are real ones, and there is a great deal of needless fear. For a healthy person, infection with Toxoplasma is usually mild or completely silent. This is educational commentary, not medical advice, and the honest message for most of you is not alarm. It is that you are probably never going to notice. The genuine dangers are narrow and specific. The first is pregnancy. A woman infected for the first time during pregnancy can pass the parasite to her unborn child, and congenital toxoplasmosis can cause serious harm. The second is severe immune compromise, advanced HIV, transplant, chemotherapy, where old, dormant cysts can reactivate and inflame the brain. Those 2 groups deserve real care. Everyone else deserves the truth, which is that this is managed by ordinary hygiene. And let me say the other necessary thing. Do not blame the cat. The villain in this story is a single-celled parasite, not the animal on your couch. A cat usually sheds this parasite for only a week or 2 after the very first infection of its whole life. You are far more likely to meet Toxoplasma in undercooked meat or on unwashed vegetables than from your pet. Cook your meat through. Wash your produce and your hands. Wear gloves in the garden and change the litter daily, since the oocysts need more than a day just to become infectious. If you are pregnant, let someone else clean the litter box. That is the entire defense. Nobody needs to fear their cat. Nobody needs to give one away, so let's hold the whole thing in one hand. Toxoplasma gondii is a single cell that can live in almost any warm-blooded animal, but can only breed inside a cat. To get back to that cat, it performs a genuine act of mind, editing in rodents, deleting their fear of felines, and sometimes turning it into fatal attraction, though exactly how. We are still working out. It reaches us through meat and soil and cat feces, settles into lifelong cysts in perhaps a third of humanity, and for most of us does nothing we can measure. Its darker reputation in humans, the mind control legend, remains a contested correlation that the best study could not confirm. Real risk for the pregnant and the immunocompromised. Quiet company for nearly everyone else. That is the strange, honest truth of the parasite that reaches all the way to the human watching this. It doesn't need to control you. It only needs a third of us to carry it, quietly, for life. If that changed the way you'll think about the meat on your plate, or the third of the people around you who may be carrying a passenger they will never feel. Subscribe, because every episode we open another file on the creatures that hijack other lives to build their own. And next time, we turn everything you've learned inside out. Every parasite in this series has been a killer. Every one has hollowed out its host, or hijacked it, or driven it to its death. Next time, a parasite that refuses to kill. A tiny tapeworm that infects a single worker ant and, instead of dooming it, makes it live for years longer than any of its sisters, golden-bodied, groomed and fed and pampered by its own nestmates like royalty, while it quietly bleeds the entire colony toward collapse. A parasite that might be reaching for your mind is frightening. Wait until you meet the one that grants its victim something that looks, terribly, like immortality. Host or hijacker. No one is safe.